So Kenya's former iconic leader and the country's third president from 2002 to 2013, Mwai Kibaki, passed on at the weekend. The authorities in Nairobi has announced a state funeral for the man widely credited for engineering a strong economic growth and infrastructure development of the largest economy east of the continent. My guest, Agnes Gitao, managing partner at GBS Africa, is a Kenyan but operating out of the UK. And she joins me now to remember the late President Stanley Mwai Kibaki. A good evening to you and welcome to the show, madam.
Thank you very much, Boston.
Thank you so much. Now, let's start. Give me your personal thoughts around the administration and the person of the late President Kibaki. How would you, as a Kenyan, personally remember him?
Boston, allow me to firstly share my deepest sorrows to the family, friends, and the entire nation, and joining them in mourning the late President Mwai Kibaki. He was an astute politician, an efficient economist, a man who steered Kenya's development agenda from inheriting an economy which was struggling at 0.6%. In his first term, managed to steer the economic growth to about 7%. And a man who helped Kenya through one of the hardest economic times. So a lot of us are remembering him for a very humble man, very modest. I'll tell you a story, Boston. The former president used to be referred to as Mtukufu, which is easily translated to as Your Holiness. When President Kibaki came to power, he decided he didn't want to be referred to His Holiness. He's not holy. There's only one holy person, and that's God. He also removed his portrait from Kenya's currency, something that was very new for Kenyans. We're used to seeing heads of state in our Kenyan shillings. He moved that. He moved that completely. So very, very humble, very modest, and extremely committed to serving the nation.
How are Kenyans at home and in the diaspora remembering their former leader, Kibaki? I've seen a few online newspapers out of Kenya speaking about the former president, says he was Kenya's best CEO. That is a very, very touching. When I saw that over the weekend, when the Saturday Standard newspaper said Kenya's best chief executive officer. And that's quite touching. If you look at it from a business and economic perspective, like you rightly said, it moved the economy from 0.6% to 7% within the first few years, first time of being in the president. That's quite a record. And if you look at the statement, and I'm going to look at that very quickly, from the New York Times, I checked through a few international media reporting on the passing of President Mwai Kibaki at the weekend, April 22nd, which was 2 days ago. As president, according to New York Times, Mr. Kibaki helped revive the country's stagnant economy and began efforts to improve access to health care. He pushed vast improvements of the country's highways and was lauded for introducing free primary school education nationwide. That's according to the New York Times. So from your friends and colleagues and others who are Kenyans in London and others you've reached out to back at home, what were they saying about the late President Kibaki?
Person, I couldn't agree more with those headlines. President Kibaki delivered Kenya from, as I said, from a situation, an economic hardship. He delivered a new constitution, which indeed is enshrined diaspora participation in both economic and political participation. He also introduced dual citizenship so that for us, when the diaspora can participate in Kenya's growth. And you're absolutely right. Free education, 1 million people, children, and even old people return to school. These are 1 million people who would otherwise have missed on education. The superhighway, which is new state of infrastructure development, he introduced an economic development plan whereby he introduced planning for the country, something that was unheard of. The thicker highway links Nairobi capital to Kenya's industrial capital in central Kenya. This has also revived Kenya's economy and also promoted economic activity across the city. How he managed Kenya's CEO, I couldn't agree with that. Under his leadership, Kenya was able to manage its budget. 90% of Kenyan budget was managed by the country. The IMF and the World Bank were almost rendered irrelevant during his term. 10 years on, the country is back to the dancing to IMF tune. He was prudent, I would say. His physical discipline was clearly evident during his leadership.
Interesting, Agnes. I was opportunity to meet for the first time meet with President Kibaki in 2004, November of 2004, at the African Securities Exchange Annual Summit at the KICC in Nairobi. My first time was stepping on the soil of Kenya and Nairobi, and I saw. Then I was again in Nairobi just a few months ago, just about less than 6 months again, and I was driven around by a colleague and a friend, and he said this was a huge highway. When was this built? And he said it was built during President Kibaki's administration. That's what they told me the last December when I was in Nairobi of last year. So I could see for myself those things, the part of what President Kibaki built was called a superhighway and what have you. But the question is, how did these economic policies and legacies, moving on, you talked about 10 years after 2013 to date. Where are we right now? Are those legacies of President Kibaki, are those economic developments still on trajectory that he left behind?
Boston, just like you had a rare opportunity of meeting the late President Kibaki in 2012, and I can only testify of his humility. Kenya is well renowned for technology and innovation. This was created under his leadership. He was able to hold back on regulation so that he can motivate innovation among startups. The Safaricom IPO, which is very well known, helped many Kenyans who had never participated in the stock market. Ordinary Kenyans, teachers, traders were able to participate in that. I mean, and the writing of a constitution that is going to be, which determines the future of this country. Has his economic policy been followed? I think credit to the current administration. They did not introduce new policies, particularly when it comes to infrastructure development. They were able to continue on what President Kibaki's government had already established. So that has been very, very positive for the country, because what that does, Boston, it means that there is some continuity. At the same time, it doesn't upset or disrupt development. At the same time, it also gives investors some confidence. Kenya CEO, he studied at the London School of Economics back in the 1950s. He was the first African to earn a first in London School of Economics, and so as a diasporan myself, as a Londoner myself, when I think of President Kibaki, I just do hope that I can maybe at one point, maybe directly or not indirectly, contribute to Kenya's development or the continent's development. He really motivates me, and I do hope that I can, in one way or other, follow in his legacy. I hope that's not too much to ask.
Now, interesting when you talk about the Safaricom IPO, because I remember that it was in that November of 2004 that President Kibaki signed that cross-border securities exchanges cooperation agreement, or MOU, with the Uganda Stock Exchange and the Tanzania Stock Exchange at the KICC. It was quite a momentous event. I think that particular act by the late President Kibaki in 2004 actually opened up a more stronger and entrenched securities exchanges transactions, you can trade one single share from the Nairobi exchange across other exchanges within that region. It was the one who signed, who put that on and provided that Philip. And I remember very well back then, that was the hallmark, that was the higher point of that particular Securities Exchange's annual meeting. So today we have a better integrated securities market in East Africa. If you take out the West African French-speaking countries, you folks have one of the strongest link as in one single company from Kenya, and it's listed in about 2, 3, 4 other exchanges within the same region.
Absolutely. He can also be credited for moving our relations with our East African neighbors to better, greater heights. We have better relationship within the Eastern African Union. New members were incorporated still under his term. Regionally, he's also contributed to the regional development. And you're absolutely right. Companies are now able to cross-list in at least 3 Eastern African countries. And I do hope in future it will expand to the newcomers of the region. Look, I remember him fondly. Of course, there were some mistakes under his leadership, but we don't talk ill of the dead, and so this moment for me is just really to share some of the incredible contribution. A man who served Kenya for over 50 years, and I guess for us is just to look back and remember and learn perhaps from his mistakes and his.
Agnes, this is remembering the late President Stanley Mwai Kibaki, but what is the state of the Kenyan economy now? You've got a general elections in a few months' time.
As you can imagine, Kenya's economy is impacted by the global uncertainty. Our economy was projected to grow at about 5%. That, of course, has been downgraded by IMF. We are heavily dependent. We're dependent on Ukraine and Russia, particularly for wheat. The cost of wheat has gone up by 40%. We have rising inflation. Certainly, it's a very difficult time and an election year, which means that there isn't much in terms of government activity going on because everybody is in that election mode. Unfortunately, the economy looks bleak, and I guess that's for many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. We were hoping to pick up some recovery. We had seen a bit of recovery from the services sector as well as the agriculture sector. That certainly will have a negative impact due to the ongoing political campaigns, but also the external shocks by Ukraine-Russia crisis.
Well, okay, we got reports that Kenya's diaspora remittances went up 25% to about $363 million last month. I'm sure what you sent home will be part of that, Agnes. Don't tell me how much you sent back, but I know you send money back home as part of your remittances back to families and friends. Thank you so much, and we really appreciate time on the show tonight. Agnes Jita, Managing Partner at GBS Africa out of London.